Hi, Callum. Welcome to the Dan. Thank you so much for finding time to join me. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Pauline. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. I'm super excited for our conversation. I generally like to start with asking people about their stories. In your particular case, it's also super exciting to me because we haven't worked together in the past. So I'm all ears and like super curious to learn more about you, what you are doing, your past, your present, and maybe how you're thinking about the future.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd be happy to share. So, I am a recent psychology graduate, and this was in the summer of last year. And as people can probably tell from the title of this video, this is very much about AI and agencies. And that seems like quite an interesting pivot. You know, psychology and AI are almost on opposite ends of the spectrum. I was always more interested in the science of the mind, so studying neuroscience, brain chemistry. I've always been interested in the why behind pretty much everything in life, but people at the forefront of what makes up life. And so studying people, what makes them think the ways that they do, which leads to behavior, that was always very interesting to me. I didn't really want to take the traditional route of becoming a clinical psychologist, though, as I'm quite blunt and focused on the science of it all. I was more interested in the sort of quantitative facts of the subject. And so data analysis was a real sort of opportunity for me to go into. I then, throughout my degree and using AI as a nice helper along the way, realized that AI is almost the best data analysis that could exist in the sense that it can ingest so much data in such a quick time and process it so coherently, understand connections. I was listening to a podcast once and they said that AI compared the anatomy of a wasp's nest to a nuclear bomb because it just made those connections and saw that there was patterns there. And so very clever analyst. So I decided to learn the beast instead of doing it's almost like a mathematician using a calculator. I'm like studying the calculator of mathematics. I'm now studying AI, the technology. And while it does seem counterintuitive for psychology and AI as a career, there are a lot of overlaps. I kind of started off my journey studying what's called machine learning and deep learning, which is all about the architecture of these AI systems, how they were created, how they go about learning. And we modeled AI's intelligence after the human brain because that was the only intelligence that we were aware of. Brains in general, every animal in the animal kingdom has a brain, and that was where intelligence came from. So, as a very simple example, one of the first architectures of AI was called an artificial neural network. And of course, humans have brains and full of neurons. And there are many similarities here to, I won't go too much into the jargon about neurobiology, but there's such a thing called neurotransmitters in a synapse, and there are such a thing called action potentials. These very much translate to artificial neurons in the sense of weights, where a neuron lights up more and is more likely to fire. This is based on mathematics. But the weights can almost be compared to that action potential. And then they have a bias, which is like a natural threshold. And so that dictates whether these neurons turn on and off. And AI at this case has now these weights and biases are called parameters. They now have, I think, 5 trillion was the most recent ChatGPT model.
Yeah.
And after my learning, I now help agencies. And so my dad, Gareth Healey, who's also been on the show, he has been experienced in the world of marketing agencies for 30 years now. And so I thought that there was no better mentor to get me into a certain audience than Gareth. And in this sense, I'm using AI and helping that target audience and target market effectively embed AI into their operations to promote efficiency ultimately, but also it's a form of change management that over time is more important as technology grows. So that's kind of where my story is at the moment. And I'll let you get a word in, Pauline.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, the podcast is about your story. So if I'm silent for the entire time, that's perfectly fine with me.
Well, that's great. We'll see how it
um,
goes.
but I'm curious a little bit. I mean, there are so many things I'm curious about, but let me start with maybe asking you to kind of walk me a little bit through this transition you were going through when you graduated
Yeah.
and you started running your own business. um, I mean, I understand you have a mentor and that facilitates things, but I
Yeah.
know this must be like still a
Mm.
very challenging exercise, right? And I'm curious to learn a bit more about like what was happening for you in this period of time. Like how were you finding your own angle, your own value proposition? Like why did you decide to launch your business straight away out of university? Like what's the
Yeah.
story there?
That's a great question. I think ultimately it starts out looking at the current state of the job market. I
Mm,
think 30 years ago, perhaps, if you had a degree, I finished with a first class degree from Manchester Metropolitan, you would almost be guaranteed a job in that sense. And admittedly, I didn't look too hard. I spent maybe 2 months applying for countless jobs, but never
still.
quite got past. Yeah, it's still a lot of time. And I was doing this along a part time job. And as a lot of teenagers do as they grow up, I've experienced different sectors of kind of teenager roles in the sense of retail, hospitality,
Yeah.
factory work, laboring. I've kind of dabbled in all of those. And I think as well as the job market being tough and me just going, I'm going to make something for myself here because, I mean, just on that point, I'm a very big believer in the fact that it's never been easier to start your own project and your own
Yeah.
business because life is so connected now and you can market offers and deliver value to people all across the world. And there's so many different outlets where you can let people hear about your voice, almost shouting from the highest rooftop you can about, the value you're trying to create, the target audience and whatnot. And I think AI made that it kind of accelerated in the sense that if you were to learn new skills and you needed to ideate on certain strategies and you wanted to learn how to set up a business, me sort of studying AI, it's almost my partner in crime in sort of
Yeah.
getting me into the start of business. I think my personality trait as well is I'm quite stubborn, strong-willed and competitive. I have always hated losing, and that almost kind of puts me in the sense of I will not stop until I win. And so I've got quite a high tolerance for sort of hard work and almost psychological pain in the sense that I just love challenge and overcoming adversity. I've just learned in life that if you apply yourself for a long enough period of time, it's almost a guarantee that you will succeed. When I was starting my business, I was working more than 8 hours on weekdays for 6 months and I didn't earn a penny. But I sort of was thinking of new offers and how I can approach certain markets, doing free work for people. And then on my first month, I earned multiple £1,000s. It's almost like the miner in the cave where he's near the diamonds, but he turns away right at the last second. It's like I've always kind of understood that as long as you stay in that game and work hard, you can achieve. And with my kind of personality, I've never much like people telling me what to do.
Okay.
As much as I like understand when I'm in the wrong, of course I'm willing to admit that, but I'd much rather be in charge of my own time and my own kind of autonomy. Even though I work more now than I would in a 9 to 5, I'm doing it for me,
Definitely.
and it's kind of my purpose. So it is. I'm enjoying it. It's a bit of a strange analogy as well. I grew up playing a lot of video games, and there's a category called RPG, and this is kind of all based around the idea of progression and getting
Yeah.
better, even if that's through like very tough challenges, like massive boss fights, etc. You get the picture. That's kind of just instilled into my mindset that I just kind of love failing, but trying and seeing that little progression along the way. And I think that's entrepreneurship in a nutshell. It's almost, I just get addicted to that kind of progress over time, and I'm enjoying the journey. Yeah, it's going really well.
That's exactly, I mean, I'm not a big gamer, but that's exactly the analogy I was given quite often when we were talking about building people processes inside agencies or inside organizations, is that you need to make it feel like a game. Then people get addicted, they stay and they play.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
love it.
I think it's great. It's all about that progression for me. I learned very early on that external rewards in the future can never truly exist because you can't experience the future. You can only experience the
Yeah.
present. So in any kind of endeavor in my life, I like to focus on the day itself and how can I improve my position from where I am? What's the next best move? And if you, even if it's something like sales you're doing on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, or impressions, or one month you earn more money than the last, or you deliver a great client project, that's kind of enough for me. I like that I like that progression in the moment rather than thinking too far ahead on like the end goal, because I do think it's the journey that's the important part, and it's
Yeah.
the happiness of the pursuit. Is something that Jimmy Carr said. Rather than the pursuit of happiness, I'm kind of relishing the progression along the way and the journey that I'm on. And entrepreneurship, there's many different sort of turns and unexpected directions that you might find yourself in when you're in control, which I just love that novelty.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I relate so much to that. But then, I mean, it kind of very naturally leads me to my next question about what are you working on now? So you mentioned a bit AI and agencies,
Yeah.
but like what are you up to? What are you doing with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, Gareth, he had a lot of has a lot of experience in the agency world and was a former CEO of a marketing agency, and for the last 10 years, he's been doing his own consultancy. And so, I learned very early on while studying the actual architecture of these AI systems. It should never be a standalone initiative, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And I always think that it purely is a tool to amplify human competence, and not just human competence, the competence and quality of the underlying systems that it has. And so I decided, and me and my dad were discussing together, that he's already auditing and working with agency founders on a retainer based system and sort of audits, like I said. He uses a system, he's written a book, it's called the Standout Framework, where we look at agencies on 8 levers of their kind
Hmm.
of makeup. So we've got sales, team, ambition, numbers, development, operations, uniqueness, technology. And we look at all sides of these, and that's kind of the experience, the framework that my dad has made for his experience in his career. And I decided that being a consultant as a 22-year-old doesn't carry a lot of weight, because people are saying, well, you've not really had much experience, you've just graduated. Why should I listen to you? And so
Mm.
I'm almost leveraging Gareth's authority and experience and learning from him daily, using the same market as his. But my skill and expertise is very much in AI and understanding these
Mm.
systems, helping teams effectively embed them. And so I've taken my Gareth's existing framework, and it's all about accelerating it rather than having my own framework for AI and my own
Yeah.
kind of system. It's going, how have agencies succeeded? What are the common strengths and weaknesses and patterns that people have seen and Gareth has seen in his career, of course, and made a framework out of it.
Yeah.
That doesn't change, in my opinion, now that AI is here, because AI is
Yeah.
purely a way of either it's an accelerator in the way that if there was weaknesses in that certain operating model, those weaknesses would be sped up as well, and it can kind of lead to a lack of control, and the sort of the weaknesses and the risk in that existing system can go out of control. Whereas the strengths in that existing system get even stronger because they're quicker. And I think
Yeah.
speed is one of the ultimate values in any business, whether that's speed of decisions, speed of something like a deliverable to your client, and it's only effective when AI is speeding up something that has a high quality to it. And so
Yeah.
I help agencies initially for that same reason. I don't just dive straight into a one-size-all implementation. If that was possible, I probably would do it because it's a productized service, a little bit more sustainable. But I very strongly believe that to get value out of AI, it completely depends of the context of its user.
Yeah, of
And
course.
this is a side note on just the people side of AI, and perhaps there might be people scared of AI taking over jobs. I would say that is very much not true in the sense that it's the people who can use that who learn to use the technology effectively that will replace the people who don't. And the effective way to use the technology, in my opinion, just as a broad kind of um, thing that I've noticed, is that it's about what makes you have skill and expertise, and how can you design AI systems that speed up the knowledge that you already have. And so a lawyer using AI is going to use AI much more effectively for law than a doctor would for if they were
Yeah.
trying to use AI for law. You know, it's all about. I was actually working with an agency last week, and I designed a system for them on Claude. We're using a Claude skill, and it was to do a weekly carousel, like a sales initiative on LinkedIn and various other kind of social platforms. And this system would research their certain criteria based on, it was like a 7-page carousel, and they had certain variables for each page, like what the research should consist of. But the research, the design, which are use their hex codes and fonts and whatnot, and then it designs it and pushes it to Canva or Adobe or something like
Yeah.
this. And they thought it was brilliant, but there was 5 people in the room, and questions started to arise, and one of them was saying, but we only focus on research in the last 2 weeks, for example, or the text is slightly too long here and it's too much jargon in the text. We want to strip that back. Those questions and comments are exactly an example of expertise because they know
Yeah.
that workflow. They understand the process and what makes it good because they've done it for so long. And so they can then put that knowledge into the AI system. I made it because I didn't know anything. Oh, well, I knew a lot about the agency, but not too much about that workflow. They just gave me some
Of course.
examples and the brief. But what makes an AI system powerful is the user's understanding of that process and the thing that they are so good at before AI was there. It's about how can you put that in the system yourself. And
That's so true. Sorry, I just want to add one point here. I was reading a research that basically they run as like a survey or a conversation with different people using AI for different use cases. And what they realized is that people would generally be overwhelmed by the quality of the output produced by AI outside of their area of expertise, and they
yeah,
were underwhelmed by the quality of output produced inside their area of expertise.
that's
So,
very
for
interesting.
example, like I'm not an accountant, but when I talk to AI about the taxes and like what are the different elements I need to consider in my paperwork, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But when I do like design or product strategy with it, I'm like, maybe
Yeah.
you could do a better job. And I'm pretty sure it's gonna be the other way around for my accountant. So I think that like what you are mentioning is super valid because depending on how much expertise you have,
Mm.
better you can become at leveraging AI for your specific expertise.
Completely, yeah, and it's very simply it's analogous to a mathematician using a calculator. Like I said
Yeah.
before, the quality and the skill level of the mathematician is going to determine whether they get to the calculation rather than the technology in between the steps from A to B. There's actually a pretty straightforward reason for why, for what you just said there, in terms of, you know, if it's your expertise, you're underwhelmed. If it's not, you're overwhelmed. And the way that these systems are built as revolves pretty much entirely around calculus. And
Yeah, of course.
it's the way that these, especially LLMs in this sense, and pretty much all of the AI systems, what they're doing when they're outputting text is basically just predicting the next word to generate over and over and over again. And they do that by ingesting the context of what's in the chat and their training and whatnot. But if you see this on a graph, and the way that these AI models are thinking, you might have 10 words, and the word riverside, like this recording of the podcast, that might have an 80% chance or an 80% likelihood that this is the next best word. And then you'll have 9 other words that all have, 20, or it'd be in this case 15, and then 0.02 and 0.0.01, and it goes down in that way. And so the way that these models work is by picking the most likely answer. They default to the mean, they default to the average. And so if your expertise is above average, it's going to almost drag you down in that sense to that baseline. Yeah.
This makes sense, and this is why, like like when people are talking about AI creativity, you don't have the same result in like ChatGPT or Claude, because they're not using the same metrics to like what they consider a good practice. But I want to go a bit deeper on this topic. I mean, I know you've been doing this for quite a while, and I assume like every agency is like very different and they have their own processes, etc.
Yeah.
But what are the typical patterns that you see, or the typical use cases that you've observed, where for like most of the agencies there is a potential for, as you call it, acceleration or enhancement with AI systems?
It's a great question. And through my experience in the last year of working with various clients in various different countries, which is something I didn't mention before, but you can start a business now. And I had a client in Hungary, for example, and it's like, that would never have been possible in history. So good time to start a business in that sense. But I actually often see that agencies have a very low proficiency and very low maturity with AI. And it was quite surprising to me, because I think anyone who's interested in AI, perhaps people listening to this podcast, all the algorithms on their social medias, their network, their friends, seems like they're all innovating all the time with the newest AI technology, and you can feel like you're behind. There's a new model you're not caught up on, or a new way of setting up a system. What I've seen most often is that teams are getting efficiency out of the tools, but for very basic use cases, like using ChatGPT, just the chat feature, not uploading any sort of context documents, which is called RAG in this sense. And I can get more into that of why context is so important. That's a massive thing. But it seems like agencies and team members in the agency are trying AI out, and they realize how effective it can be, but they don't know where to start. And that is a massive reason of why the kind of bottom of my funnel, when I begin to work with agencies, I'm always saying, unless you know exactly what you want, and I kind of agree that this is the right thing to do, we do an audit of the whole agency. Because AI, whereas a calculator is just for calculations and mathematics, AI you can practically use in any task, because it's just ingested as much data as possible. And so people don't know where to start. It's almost a paradox of choice. Like, what's the most effective thing that I can do? What's even possible? And so I do the audit to get that element of clarity and prioritization, and go, okay, here's a roadmap based on our conversation and the answers to my questions and the frameworks that you have. What should we do first? And pretty much always the first thing that I see is that there's a lack of governance around the tools. And there's a lot of implications for this going forward. And I think the longer and the more rapidly AI tools get developed, the worse this will get, because they'll become more capable, more destructive. But I see free plans, first of all, people using free plans that aren't an agency plan, or even personal plans, which still aren't very good. And this is completely makes them at risk to shadow AI. People using it without the founder knowing, or leadership team knowing. If agencies are working with regulated data that they have in client MSAs that they should keep very secure and private, and one of the team members puts that in a free ChatGPT chat or a free Gemini chat, that data is not safe. It's there's that old adage, if the product is free, then you are the product. These tools are there to gather data from its users. And when
Yeah.
you're on paid plans, and especially more bulletproof business team plans, you can turn this model training off and regulate it
Yeah.
further. You know, in my case, in the UK, a lot of these models comply with UK GDPR. And even then, you know, I have clients who would go, we're not going to connect Office 365 because there's too much sensitive data in here. Let's just create a secure environment on our own. But completely, governance is the thing. I would almost always say for agencies, if you're running an agency listening to this, you want a company plan. And for every AI tool you have, you want a company plan that everyone uses, because not only does this give you control and you're able to have full knowledge that the settings are configured correctly, it's also the only real way you can convey AI usage to your clients, because you can say, we have this, say if it's Claude, we have a Claude plan. This is the name of the Claude plan. This is the type of plan we use. These are the members on it. These are the settings we have configured. All of that could be in a client MSA at the beginning of your relationship. If someone's using a personal ChatGPT plan, it isn't a Claude plan for one. So there's different implications there. Claude doesn't have any data storage in the UK or Europe. It's purely US servers. Claude have a maximum or a minimum retention policy where it's held in their servers for at least 30 days before deleted.
Yeah.
All of these AI applications have different implications. And even if you did use a personal plan of Claude, but you had an agency plan, it's still not got the same settings. So you can't be completely transparent with clients. And so definitely getting that company-wide plan is the first start. And there are many more to come. But if you have any comments on that before I do a monologue.
This makes sense. I'm also curious to learn a bit more about like the automation, elements, or like you were mentioning the content generation support systems. Like what are the typical kind of patterns you are observing there?
Okay, yeah, good question. I would say that once the boring governance is out of the way, like I just said, sorting out all the client
and it takes time. It takes time. I know.
It takes time. It's completely necessary, and it's like if you don't do it, you're building your data security on sand. You want to spend a lot of time building a stable base. Then, when your team members want to innovate and build new stuff with AI, they can do it in an environment where there's no risk, which is completely what we want. I think that's actually where team adoption comes in, because I focus a lot on the people side. How can we incentivize AI usage and train people on certain systems? And because of what I said about prioritization when it comes to AI, I do think the best method of training that I've discovered is actually automating one of their specific workflows. So the people who aren't very technical with AI and they're not sure quite how to use it, if they are the experts on their own workflows, they know the certain pain points, they know the steps from A to B, hopefully, all of these things, output quality. And so rather than there being a sort of common pattern that I've seen with certain types of automations, it's very much been, what is the context of your agency and how can we make a workflow that best represents what your workflow is? I will say in general, it's more about people learning custom systems. So let's say ChatGPT has custom GPTs, Claude has Claude projects and skills, Gemini has gems, the list goes on. That's a very important starting point, because once people realize that even prompting, which might be controversial, but I don't think prompting is very important at all, because I think purely it's the context that you put in these AI systems that is the value. And as we discussed earlier, the people who have that expertise and strategic judgment have that context. So that is the value. And it's about codifying these workflows into the AI itself. Aside from that, I think that time tracking is always a very polarizing topic in agencies, something that
interesting.
It's quite hard to manage. And even for companies, so I work with a media planning agency and they earn commission, for example, so they didn't really need to keep track of their time. But I think that when it comes to AI, there's it's a lot easier because of its speed to overservice or be a perfectionist. And so
Yeah, that's true.
time tracking systems that make it very seamless and automate that system of time tracking can allow you to sort of it can generate you reports to leadership team, for example, and say, this is how many hours were saved this week on this new AI process. This is where these are the hours that were freed. These are where you can put them, instead of them leaking into sort of low ROI meetings and admin and whatnot, just to sort of get through the day. Because unfortunately, as much as AI speeds up processes, it's not going to make the work days shorter. That's something I found out very quick. If anything,
Yeah.
it's making them longer because the opportunity cost of not working is now higher. There's that much possible. But I've done time tracking automations for 3 agencies now. That's quite a common one because in general, it's like, what are the systems and the processes that we know we should be doing that we really don't want to do, and is very manual and strips away from our creativity and strategy skills and people skills that we thrive on, rather than just sitting looking at a spreadsheet and analyzing loads of data. Automations for time tracking is one of those, because time tracking is quite a hated part of the industry, although it's very important. I've speaking to a CFO that me and Gareth are quite sort of familiar with, and he was comparing an agency to a car manufacturing business. Like a car manufacturer knows the price of every nut and bolt in their model, which allows them to then sell it for a suitable price and perhaps make repairs. In a knowledge-based business like the agency, people are that raw material. People are the nuts and bolts, and the cost, rather than money, is time that you spend on processes. And as these processes get sped up with AI, it's much harder to track them. And so automating this is very important. I'd say that's a massive one I've seen.
Yeah, that's a big one. I agree. I
Yeah.
have one more question because you were mentioning a few times about the context and
Oh,
how
yeah.
important this is.
Yeah.
And I would love, I mean, I know you have a very special approach to like building this context, which is teaching AI is like teaching a new employee. And I'm very curious to learn a bit more about how you see that and like what is the right way for a company which is, as we already kind of acknowledged, not necessarily very deep on AI, and they're not technical, they haven't done this before.
Yeah.
So how can they leverage AI in the best way to build this context, to build this knowledge, and to teach their new employee?
Yeah. I think that is the most important thing that I've discovered about AI. I think if there was one takeaway out of this video for anyone listening, it would be the importance of context. And this might be more compelling to me because of my psychology background. People have the biological hardware of a brain, and they have the way that brain learns and develops is through experience from the environment and stimulus from the environment. Then it grows, learns new skills, etc. AI is very similar in the way that it has its computational hardware with these algorithms, learning algorithms, the initial data that they've been trained on to understand the meanings between words, etc. But then it's learning and training is data, and that's AI's version of the environment for people. And so if you don't train AI on context, on your context specifically, it's like hiring a super fast intern with internet access. They've got all this data, they're very quick, they can make coherent arguments on basically any field. Like we've said, that's all quite diverted to the mean, so it has a base level understanding of every sort of industry or most industries, but it doesn't know anything about, in this case, it would be agencies. It doesn't know anything about who you are, who you serve, your mission, your values, your brand voice. SOPs, which I've quickly realized isn't too much of a used word in agencies because the creative work is a bit more fluid in its operations. But SOPs in the sense of, okay, what are the repeated workflows that we do in the agency? And the list goes on. And it's basically, like you said, the employee analogy is you want to train AI like you're onboarding a new employee, because that's the way that you can get AI to work for you rather than picking a system that works for everyone. Simply, if you went to an off-the-shelf AI tool, and of course you use these tools to then create custom systems, that's when they become valuable. But when you don't configure them, a 10-year-old could ask AI about what Lego set they should buy. An 80-year-old might ask the best flowers for their garden. It's designed to be used by everyone, which is great, and it's important in that way. But you wouldn't want to hire something that is good at everything for your agency. You want it would be an employee in this case, but you want a system, you want technology that works specifically for you rather than for anyone. It's like that whole thing, specialization, jack of all trades, master of none. AI is a master of nothing until you give it the value that you've learned and your expertise into the systems. And so that is completely the first thing that I always do with agencies. It's like, and that's great for training as well. Like I said about prompting before, people can get overwhelmed by these prompts that are 200 lines long, and they have big handbooks, prompt libraries that they should use for each task. Once you set up the system and set up an environment that knows your agency and your workflows, AI can teach people how to use AI. And ironically, that's how I was learning about AI in the beginning. I'd ask, what's the best course I can do? Please explain what a recurrent neural network is in more detail and give me analogies and whatnot. AI can teach you how to operate and interact with itself, which is quite profound and amazing once you realize this is true. The only way this is possible, though, is if you ingest the context. If you ask, what is this, what is this workflow in my agency? It would say, I have no idea, or it would fabricate some lie because it hasn't been trained on that data. There's a process called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. It's basically you introducing new data into AI. So it's trained on billions and billions of data sets across the internet, everything it can find. That's how it can speak and interact with people coherently. But it isn't trained on the data that lives in your heads, your kind of IP, your personal skill and your knowledge of specific niche workflows inside your business. And so once this environment is set up, and there's a lot about this on my page and on my LinkedIn that I've been talking about recently, but it's, for example, a Claude plugin. And this is a system, there's an application in Claude called Claude Cowork. And the analogy I give to this is chat is your kind of search engine. Cowork is an employee because it learns, instead of dragging in PDFs every time you open in a new chat and dragging in new context, you can internalize this knowledge into Cowork, and then every time you interact with it, it understands all of the context about your agency. And this just allows it's AI to work with you rather than against you. It's simply, whenever you have any kind of query, the more it knows about your situation, the better it can help. And it's very true with agencies. And in the sense of context, it has a nice advantage. And like I said earlier, it's not that common for knowledge workers in the creative industry to have their processes mapped, 20 steps in meticulous detail. Here are the output policies. Here are the human verification steps. Here's what data we use. It's quite fluid. And I think this is undoubtedly a reason why agencies do so well, because they offer, each employee has a different way of approaching the problem, and that allows for more innovation. It's very good in this way, but AI doesn't have that. It doesn't have our understanding. And so you almost need to train it like it's an alien.
Yeah. And I like it. I like that analogy.
Completely. It doesn't have knowledge of, especially knowledge of what doesn't exist. And the reason why I say it's an advantage is because it can force agencies to actually map their processes. And this isn't a sort of desirable way to spend a Monday afternoon, for example. It's not, people want this fancy AI system that looks amazing instead of sitting down at a table together and picking apart their processes. But I think that the only way you can effectively make custom systems out of AI is by mapping the process in brutal detail. And
Yeah.
Through my learning at university, there's two main types of data. You have quantitative, which in the AI sense, you would ingest every single file relevant to the task to give AI more context. And this is simply how I'd go about setting up a custom system. So you'd bring in everything, every document that's relevant to the task. And then the thing that people miss is qualitative data. And so that's, of course, the nuance that is captured through conversation and people's kind of epistemological viewpoint, their own understanding of a process rather than kind of a proof of a facts. It's more kind of subjective viewpoints, and that can offer a lot of value. And a very simple use case you can do with AI, if you want to set up a custom system, you start a new chat, get in all of the quantitative context, say, I want to build this system for my agency, but then you can get it to interview you. And there's a lot of transcription tools that you can use. I use Granola myself, Notion do it, Gemini do it. And I advise agencies to get together in a big meeting with their team who understand the workflow best. You can ask AI a simple prompt to kick off the interview process. I would like to start this workflow. You've got my files already here. Please ask me, you could say 100. It depends how much time you have, really. But you could say, ask me a set number of questions to give AI as much context as possible about this process. And you can then answer those questions in a meeting one by one with your team members in the agency. That transcript is then recorded. And undoubtedly then certain pain points are going to be brought to the surface, and there'll be a pretty clear step-by-step process, what good looks like, what bad looks like, how long the workflow should take. Everything possible context-wise that you could understand about a workflow can be answered in that interview process, along with files that represent the workflow. At the end of that, you can then go, you've now got all the data, please, make a context file. So MD is usually the thing that AI reads most effectively, but it'll have that context in the chat. So you can go, please build me a custom GPT, a Gemini Gen, a Claude skill, etc. And then it has that in brutal detail. And then when you're training team members on this, like I said, I use Claude plugins. You can use Claude Cowork, and skills as they're created can just appear on people's seats automatically, which is great for team adoption. If you have someone struggling with AI, they can load up a system and go, perhaps it's a process of generating first drafts from research, and the skill or the system, the GPT, whatever platform you're using, they can go into that shared system and go, can you teach me how this workflow goes? And then it goes, yeah, absolutely. Here's all the context.
How do I work with you?
Exactly, yeah. So it can be a very helpful tool for team adoption in the way that, as long as leadership have almost injected AI with their skill and expertise and knowledge about their agency, that's their knowledge. It's not AI that's teaching them. It's almost the leadership that's teaching them, but through AI, where people can ask 1,000 questions if they wanted to, or they don't need that founder involvement. That's a massive thing that we design AI systems around. How can we make it so the founder isn't constantly asking or getting bombarded with questions about workflows? A lot of the time it's because company wikis and agencies are collecting dust in a corner somewhere or in a file that people don't access. When this context and the wiki in this example, which can be one of the quantitative files you use to set up a custom environment, once it's in AI, people can just log into the AI team plan and go, that question that they would have asked the founder, what's allowed in this workflow? What does good outputs look like? And they go, yeah, here you go. That's all ingested because it's in the environment, and therefore it becomes an employee. And this is amazing once it's come to fruition.
I love it. I mean, now it kind of leads me, I think, to the last question. And I know you already started talking about it, but I want to kind of develop a bit the thinking there.
Of course.
So then what's next? Like, how will the future for agencies leveraging AI look like? How will an agency employer look like in the future? What's your take on that?
I think that this is almost the most important goal for everyone that I work with, and rightfully so. People want to be prepared for what's next.
Of course.
The honest answer is that we don't know how quickly AI systems are going to evolve. We don't know where the kind of filter is, the great filter on the technological development. There are, of course, ways to prepare for this, though, which I'll discuss. Quite an interesting and morbid viewpoint about AI is that currently it's a form of narrow intelligence. We have to actually give it the inputs and configure the systems for it to think and work. We have a general intelligence as people where we can theoretically learn anything on our own will. We can go and I could pick up a guitar and just, if I play it for long enough, then I'll figure it out. Watch enough videos and whatnot. But AI doesn't have that autonomy to go and learn stuff itself if it wants to yet. When it does, if it does, hopefully not, because there's this thing called technological singularity where if AI has that autonomy, it could develop better AIs. And then the better AI is better at making itself smarter. And that's that kind of loop. We don't know how quick that would happen. It could be overnight because it's like an exponential growth of intelligence that perhaps we couldn't comprehend. And not to try scare anyone there, but that's almost to frame my point here, is that to future-proof your business and yourself with the future of AI, it goes back entirely to context. If you've saved these context files and workflows, honestly, the more AI knows about you as a person and your business, the better. Because whenever these new tools develop, and perhaps Claude, because it seems to be dominating everything right now, especially my day-to-day tasks, because it's so amazing, they could raise their prices, raise them to £1,000 a month minimum.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets scary, because they've got, they're integrated in that many businesses that a lot of them would just have to take the hit for that.
Yeah.
I use an account called GitHub, which is a very popular place to store code and repositories and whatnot. All of the files that I use in my co-work and my Claude code systems are saved in GitHub. And this is all the context, like, what are my frameworks? Who do I work with? Certain facts about my clients to help me with their workflows, my brand voice. There's about 100 of these files and different skills. Say if Claude raised their prices, or they just weren't as good anymore, and Gemini started to take over, and there was a new feature on Gemini, the context is the value, not the system. In the same way that the brain isn't necessarily the value of the person, it's the skills and the memories within that brain that is the value. And so the AI, the hardware of AI isn't the value, it's the data and the context. Like I said before, that's the way to future-proof your business and yourself. Capture as much context as you can. And don't capture context where it's regulated data, of course, but in general, meeting transcripts, this podcast perhaps, we'd ingest the transcript and go, save that somewhere, because it might be useful in the future. There might be something that we can pull out of this conversation, as of course there is, because it's been a great conversation. It's as you go on, that's the main thing, for agencies to survive, capture as much context as possible. I have a client who has a subscription to a transcription tool for meeting transcriptions, but the team don't use it. And to me, I'm like shocked, because I'm thinking you need to start doing that. But people in their team, they don't know how AI works, so they couldn't possibly understand that context is the value. But as soon as people realize this, they will go, okay, the more of a digital kind of vault I have of my knowledge, the better, because it's for future proof. And as well as that, I think purely a growth mindset to change. I think times change. AI might be old news in 10 years. There could be some new hot topic that everyone's using to accelerate their personal lives and business lives. Digital was the big thing in the 2000s, where people were going to laptops, for example, and everyone thought Google would make people dumber because the information's all readily available and they don't have to think. And there's implications about that of AI, which of course some of them are true, but it's about understanding that AI, when used correctly, can just greatly help your life in general. To me, it's a way of enjoying your work more, simply. I think
Yeah.
the parts of yourself that are naturally uh, competent and you're well suited for certain types of work, which means you do better work, you get the satisfaction from progression, you naturally enjoy that more because you're good at it. Keep that to yourself. Keep that to your own inputs and work. Use AI to speed it up, perfectly fine, but delegate the tasks you don't want to do to AI. I think that's the main message. You know,
I love it.
I'm an analytical thinker. I love solving problems. I don't like sitting there and designing things. I'm not a graphic designer by any means. I actually hate it, and some people love it, and that's completely okay. Some people might delegate analysis work to AI while they do the thing that they love, which is graphic design. In my situation, I'm letting AI design for me, and I'm doing the analytical work. You know, that's the balance, I think. And even the stuff you're naturally good at and your skill, like we've discussed here, it's you can make AI systems effective because it's your knowledge, and so
Yeah.
it's never going to replace you. It's just going to be a tool that helps you do more of the work that you're already good at and avoid the work that you don't want to do.
Yeah, and I love. I mean, I think it's a perfect closing framing, right? Like
Yeah,
use AI to be able to do more work that you love and less
exactly.
things that you don't. I love it.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
yeah. No, thank you very
And
much.
thank you, Callum. It was
Yeah, it's been a
great
great
talking to
conversation.
you.
Yeah, as always. Hope everyone's enjoyed listening if you got this far.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Later. Thanks for listening.